Hey everybody and welcome back to me ranking every single unit in Wargame Red Dragon. Part 2 of planes, in case you didn't watch last episode or forgot. I will not go through them in the armory, but through them in the deck building, just so we can take a look at their veterancy and availability, which is very crucial due to how inconsistent it is, or how it varies from plane to plane. Whereas the other tabs are, generally speaking, pretty consistent, so that is of course very important. Last time we did, unfortunately, only the US air tab. I hope we're gonna be a bit faster this time around, simply because I think a lot of concepts, etc., I went over in the last one, so you might want to watch that one as well if you have not already. In case in case I mention something and I just say, well, I already mentioned this, then you should probably watch part 1. I think that's all that needs to be said. So let's get on with it, shall we? IL-102. This ugly duck has 2 front and 2 rear armor, which of course in practice can, most of the time, basically will increase its effective HP from 10 to 25. 2 armor reduces incoming HE damage by 60%. You do the math yourself in case you don't believe me. And carries quite a payload. 14-15 HE bombs is a lot in a decent pattern. It's relatively tight, but not too tight. And sometimes, it's not often, but sometimes the heat gun can actually be kind of useful. It is very expensive though, and on top of the HP armor doesn't have too much ECM, only 10%. With a certain strategy, it can be very, very strong, and that is to just essentially overload the enemy AA. You pack in the Twin 5T down with it. The IL-102, that's 4 planes with 2 front and rear armor. And then you pack in like some seat planes and like 2 cards of ASAPs or something like that. And then you can, if you manage to, you can really start overloading the air tab and just keep bombing and keep sending your planes out, and it just won't die. The downside, of course, is those planes cost a ton, right? And you need to have a couple of planes in the first place and not, get a bit unlucky with the enemy AA or something along those lines. So it sounds easier than it is done. But if you can get it done, the IL-102 and the 25T they can just steamroll out of control. That said, the IL-102 is not nearly as impactful as the 25T is, outside of this strategy most of the time, because it generally has to dive in a lot deeper, right? It dives in, drops the bombs and evacs. The 25T can circle, right? Circle, and while it's turning away already, send out an anti-gem, right? Etc. etc. The IL-102 drops, I guess in theory you can micro in practice, it's not feasible. You can drop like half the payload and turn off the weapon and then circle around and drop the other half somewhere else or something like that. In theory possible, in practice I wouldn't do that. But other than that, is the I-102 is you drop 1 payload and then you're out. The 25T is constant damage potential, that you can't just bait a missile out and then it's out of missiles or something, right? So that's why in practice the I-102 is relatively, I guess you could say, niche. It does have the biggest HE payload for the Soviets, though, in the air tab. In team games, unless you coordinate with your team and do massive bombing runs or something, it is, I would say, significantly weaker because an AA density is a lot higher. And generally speaking, per player, you fight on a more narrow front line. So it's a lot easier to get your IL-102 killed. Like I said, especially if you send it out on its own. If you do like a massive bombing turn or something, that's a different story, but yeah. In 1 vs 1's 2 armor is a lot more impactful than is in team games. Which doesn't mean that it is useless in team games, but you have to keep in mind that whether you like it or not, this is not, a value judgment or something like that, but a lot of team games are just on overcrowded maps compared to 1 vs 1's. At least it always depends on how you view it, but 4v4s and like 2v2 maps are kind of the norm. So in these matches, you know, sometimes like the AA of every player can shoot at a certain plane because of how small the map is compared to the amount of players. So that's why when I say in team games, I mostly mean in quote-unquote proper team games, which means 4v4s on 4v4 maps, 2v2s on 2v2 maps, and not, you know, overcrowded. But that is, again, a whole different discussion. 21 bis. It's a solid rocket power plane. I said it last time, I think rocket power planes are a bit undervalued. This is one of the best ones, I reckon. It's not very good for big splash damage. It's really single target removal. The Polish MiG-21MF, for example, has these 4 huge HE rockets, so you can actually deal like to multiple, you know, infantry targets, deal a lot of damage. This one is really a single point removal, but that is up to like 5, 6, maybe even 7 armor. Or, you know, let me put it this way: if you side or let alone rear shot a tank with this, you will deal significant damage. That said, side shotting is a bit difficult if you have to like first fly around the plane, because unlike ATGMs, you can't, you know, shoot them at an angle. You have to fly straight towards the tank, of course. So side shotting, unless the tank is literally showing it to you while you're flying towards it, relatively tough to do. But if you want to snipe anti-air, something like Bradley's, IFVs, very good. Used to be sort of meta in 2015 and early 16ish, when the Recon Bradley was like everywhere and really quote-unquote blight and ranked. I would never like build a Red 4 deck without these MiG-21 Bisses or something like that. Just very good for removing those Bradleys. But yeah, like I said, it's fast. You can fire position with this, of course, and just insta-kills essentially any AA. Of course, you know, if you're going up against Books or Patriots, they might stun you before you get your rockets out. But in my eyes, you know, like I said, I think rocket power planes are a bit underrated, but it's also maybe just partially because they're not quite as relevant anymore, and you tend to value other planes more these days. MiG-21 SMT, not a horrible plane, but then you compare this to the British Jaguar GR1 and you're just gonna be sad. In a pinch isn't inherently horrible, but like 0% ECM is of course bad. The payload for 60 points is honestly fine, given that you're also very fast, but like no ECM. I wouldn't recommend this, but if you want, I think in small games this can actually kind of work, just because AA isn't as prevalent, and you can use this to bait or like, you know, sponge for other planes. So it might not be too bad for that. You know, if you know or anticipate where AA is, you buy one of these, and then your quote-unquote main plane, let's say in a MiG-27K or 27M, that you really want to survive at any cost. So you send this in first, fire position where you know or think the AA is, and first of all, unless the enemy really micros it, the AA will first shoot at the MiG-21. And second of all, if you guess right or you're just simply correct, the bombs, unless your plane is killed beforehand, will drop on the AA and fairly likely kill it, depending on what it is. Moving on, MiG-23ML. It's a bit of an awkward helicopter hunter. Base availability is 5 on Rookie, by the way, not 6. This is due to Soviet availability bonus. The nice thing about these R60 Molniers, and it's the same on MiG-21 BIS, unlike most AA missiles, they actually have a reload time of 1 second, right? If you look at the MLD and like similar planes, the more advanced SRAMs have 2 seconds. So that means that in the helo dive, you can actually get 2 or even 3 of these missiles off, as opposed to like 1 or 2 of these, you know, certainly more than the other one, right? So that's actually very useful. However, if this is your only missile, not amazing. And the gun, this time I came prepared and actually opened the armory tool beforehand. The gun is once again a Vulcan stat clone, so essentially the best type of gun you can have. Only 30% accuracy, not 40. Yeah, so does this one. But it's a good gun. It's a tad too fast and not the best turn radius to be like a really good helo hunter. So it's really not the best, but it is very, very cheap, of course, right? So that means that you can also use this as a scouting plane, or for example, you know, being so cheap. First of all, it most of the time will force enemy helicopters to land in the opener, because the AA most likely hasn't caught up yet, so it's too far behind to actually protect the helicopter against your plane. Because if they don't, you might actually kill it. You scout helo drops, you scout enemy, you know, planes of your opponent actually coming in. And if your opponent doesn't care for it or something, you might just snipe their CV coming in a helicopter towards the second spawn, namely on Nuclear Winter as well as Highway to Seoul. And not only does it mean you kill 110 points or 130 points, it also, of course, means that the reinforcements are going to be massively delayed for your opponent. But it's just not nearly as consistent as something like a Lazur or L17K. So that's why I'm actually gonna derank it a bit. And since it is 900 kmh, it sometimes has trouble actually lining up to the helicopter and properly diving it. Your ideal speed is usually 750 kmh. If you're a plane that requires to, you know, gun run it. MLD is just big. The big ML. It's a bigger ML. It has fewer missiles, but stronger, of course. 5 HE, more accuracy, more range, lower rate of fire, but I explained that. More CM as well. Doesn't really have the great availability, right? You get 3 on Harden, but you don't have the option for 2 on Elite, which you might prefer. So it's not quite as consistent as, you know, something else, some other planes. The upside is, of course, excuse me, if you get into plane range, or the enemy ASF is, I don't know, out of missiles, for some reason you get into plane range, you're actually pretty relatively deadly to planes. The problem is, of course, getting there in the first place. You know, AA might stop you, or the enemy ASFs with a long range missiles might stop you. That said, it's solid. It's a solid alternative for the ML, but of course more expensive. Also, I should do this, because there are planes with the same name in other nations. I think that's the only MLD. MiG-25 BM, solid seat. I don't know what to say. It's solid. It's good. It's fine. It's 150, but it's also only 1 per card. It is very accurate. Has the maximum range you have for seat, 50% ECM. It's fast. It even has exceptional air detection, which not all seats have. It's just a solid seat plane, no. But it just can't keep up with the Raven. Raven with better stealth and even better ECM. It's just something else. For a cheaper price, right? The Raven is one. I always forget. It's 140, right? I always forget, but I think it's only 140, which is actually crazy. Because when you think about it, right? When you compare this to the Raven, what does the Raven lose? The Raven loses 8 AP. Okay. Right? Let me just go into the armory. It's pretty crazy how much better this is for a lower price. You do lose 2 missiles, but that is in reality just not very impactful. Because rarely are you gonna circle or fly so long that you're gonna get more than 2 missiles out. Right. You lose 8 AP. You have the same time on target and fuel. You have better stealth, same turn radius, better ECM. You have significantly worse air detection and the same speed. And you lose 2 missiles, of course. But that's a trade-off I do any day of the week. Any day. Alright. 25 RBT. I don't know, it's okay, right? I went over the artwork last guy and the F111F artwork for, I want to say 15 points more. Let me check. Yeah, for 15 points more, you get 4 additional bombs and 10% extra ECM. With air detection, time on target might be slightly different. Time on target is actually the same. But it's just significantly better for simply 15 points more. And at this price range, paying 15 points more for a like 50% payload increase, basically, while you don't lose availability, is huge, right? But usually availability isn't quite a concern on other units, right? Whether your medium tank is 8 or 9 per card or 8 or 10, usually not a huge deal. But if your plane is, of course, 2 or 3 per card, that's massive, right? So 50 or 33%, depending on how you look at it, difference. But if you don't have a tank and your tank is 15 points better, but you have 2 lower per card, okay. But if a plane is 15 points, costs 15 points more, and is also lower per card, that would massive difference. But if you cost more and you're stronger, but you still have the same availability, that can actually be incredibly good on planes. I hope what I just said makes sense, but I'll be get the point. In any case, 15 points increase, not a huge difference since you only get 2 anyway, and you still get 2. And yeah, it's you know, if you have really trouble with your opponents always like smoking the tanks or something when they're on 2 HP and you can't finish them off or something, that is an option. I would just go for a Smurge instead, but it is an option. It's not a good option, but it's an option. PD. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. Well, not that far fallen. It's still a good plane. It is used to be, I think, 110 points and elite, then got nerfed to veteran and lower price. It's still pretty good. It is, of course, inconsistent. 40% base accuracy isn't a whole lot. You're a veteran, right? So this let me go look at the chart again. So this gets bumped up to a whooping 54%. Let me just... Oops. Right? So since someone was saying, oh, the math is actually correct, on the, I think it was on the Raven or something, the last video I made, and I said that, you know, the accuracy increase, you know, it's actually pretty wrong. And then, you know, there was the one example I brought where it's actually pretty more or less on point. But here we have veteran and it says 24% accuracy increase. In reality, the accuracy on veteran is going to be 54%. And you can test this in game if you don't believe me. And if you do the math and you actually get 49.6% if it was truly plus 24% accuracy. So if this accuracy multiplier is correct, then it's a coincidence. You know, it's not the rule. Trust me, this is not correct. In any case, PD. It is very strong because the huge thing about the PD is, if this missile hits right, it's gonna stun a plane instantly. The suppression is gonna stun a plane. The suppression on 7 or lower HE missiles, unless you get a crit, doesn't stun plane. Oh, there's actually 7 HE missiles on planes. I think there's only 6 HE, right? In any case, these, as well as the MiG-31 and the F-14 missiles, are the only ones, to my knowledge, that stun enemy planes with a hit, regardless of whether they crit or not. If of course, they do get a critical hit, and the plane doesn't have 2 armor, it will one-shot the plane as well, which is also huge. You need, with very, very rare exceptions, very rarely 7 HE or 6 HE might even also work, but in most scenarios, if you get a critical hit on a missile, you need to have 7 HE at least to one-shot a plane, right? Which means that PD as well as MiG-31s and F-14s are really the only ones that can consistently, sort of, one-shot planes. And this one even more so because this one comes at much higher veterancy, is much more affordable, and actually like engages planes at close range. And you know, being on 2 different sets of missiles, even though they have slightly different ranges, they of course get fired simultaneously as well, unless instead of course having 4 of them and they get fired one after the other. So yeah, and of course only 100 points. The other thing is, this actually counters 2 armor planes relatively well. Not amazingly, because you have to get relatively close, but of course having very high HE output, especially if you consider the price. And I mean output, not just, you know, in total, but, you know, within a short burst. You immediately get 2 of these out at 16 HE and another 2, and it's another 16 HE, right? At 32 HE in like a very short time span. And of course, that means you will deal a lot of damage to 2 armor planes, which tend to have lower ECM than, let's say, ASFs. So this plane can be an absolute monster. Low points means that if it kills a plane, it vets up relatively quickly as well to elite, because the amount of experience you get per kill depends on the cost of the unit you killed and your own cost. So yeah, the other thing is, of course, sometimes it just doesn't do jack shit, right? 2 of those engage a 40 or 50% ECM plane, no missiles hit, and both of your planes die. It might happen as well, but generally speaking, 40 points, it's a very, very good ASF still. And the other thing is, a single one even might threaten your opponent's planes enough that if you have it circling, they might not send it out, because it always is a gamble in a wargame, right? But with these ones even more so, because the variance of what can happen is just, you might not get hit at all by this plane, but this plane also has a much higher chance to just instantly one-shot you than other planes do. So whereas other planes on average, or like in 95% of the cases, will just damage you, this one has like the additional 5% or something, whatever you want to call it, to just instantly one-shot you. And that's just such a huge threat, because you don't want to trade your 1 Picard 170 point ASF plane to like 100 points plane, of course. I hope this made sense. MiG-27. How the mighty have fallen once more. Used to be, I believe, 95 points. And well, back in the day, when people didn't really smoke their tanks, they might have smoked off your ATGM planes or ATGM infantry or something, towns, before assaulting. Smoking your own tanks was actually pretty rare. Or if it happened, more an accident. I was certainly not the one who quote-unquote invented it or started doing it. The first person that I saw doing it, or I saw actively doing it, was random, and I just copied it from him, like most people did. But yeah, before people did that, people just used cover like bushes to hide their tanks in, which of course still happens, but other than that, nothing. And that means that on especially open maps like Mudfight or certain areas of Paddy Field or the middle part of Bloody Ridge, lots of open field, not so much cover, and if there's cover, it's thin cover that you can see through with recon. So the MiG-27 was essentially, unless it had a Patriot or something or ASF up, as close to a guaranteed super heavy kill as you could really get, especially for the price. You didn't even need to upvet it, because that gun was also nerfed, but that dealt like 7 damage on its own to like any tank up front. That gun was crazy, and it even had splash damage, right? So if you had 2 tanks very close together, this would also damage the tank right next to it with its gun. So this was absolutely crazy. It got nerfed. The gun got nerfed. It's still very good, the gun, and the price got nerfed. I think it might have also come on Elite in the past. I'm not sure. But yeah, that thing used to be absolutely crazy. One, because it was much stronger, but also, of course, a lot less smoke. These days, it depends on like who you go up against, right? Against good players, this will do a lot less than it did in the past. Against not so good players, or just quote unquote normal players, your average player, this might just be still a very solid plane. But just because you don't know who you're up against, and because I generally rate these units based on your opponent being a strong opponent, I wouldn't necessarily use that. MiG-27M, honestly, just worse. For 10 points more, you get 10% ECM, yes. You get a tiny bit more range on the missile, but most importantly, you lose availability. Only 2 Picard down with it, or 1 up with it, whereas of 3 down with it, 2 up with it. So this is honestly not really a good trade. 27k is fine. What hurts this plane the most is just the veterancy coming on rookie instead of trained, like let's say the Syria or something, makes it just a tiny bit less consistent. So you have 50 instead of 54% accuracy. Doesn't sound big, but it really is just a bit inconsistent. The gun isn't really impactful, because most of the time you fire at max range anyway. But if you know that the opponent doesn't have AA, or the AA is out of ammunition, anything like that, if you know that your plane is going to be safe to essentially just circle over the enemy units, then what you can do, of course, is turn off the missiles, gun run the enemy tank, deal a bit of damage, and essentially the moment you start a gun run, turn your missiles on, which means that for one, your gun's going to shoot and deal damage, but two, the what's it called? Having higher accuracy due to being closer, at close firing off at closer range means you get an accuracy boost and hit with a higher chance. So yeah, that said, it's still a 2 card. Fine, forget 30 AP missile plane, which if both hit will just kill any tank in the game up front at full HP. So even if it isn't that consistent, it's still very good and quite a threat. And of course, enemy tanks aren't always at full HP, right? Let's say you're in the middle of engaging. It's usually actually the best time to call in a plane, right? Let's say your super heavy is engaging their super heavy. Ideally, you want to bait him and be at a slight disadvantage, and fire ideally at max range as well, so the fight takes as long as you can. But be on your back foot or retreat or make your opponent just overextend, and send out the AT jump plane in the same time, so you focus on your tank, but don't see the plane coming in because they're too tunnel visioned on your tank, trying to follow it, hunt it down, and then just kill their tank. And of course, you don't always have to go for a full HP tank, right? MiG-29S is not a very good HE bomber. 415 HE bombs is not horrible, but for 130 points and only 2 per card, it's just if you really want an HE bomber that's survivable, fast, and also reloads fast, yeah, okay, it's fine. But that's really it, It does have some nice missiles as well, but it's really not that great. MiG-29M on the other hand, it's an interesting one. For one, it has medium stealth. Not to say medium stealth as seaplanes, it actually is, I think, right? Let me check really again. Yeah, it actually has, okay, for comparison's sake, right? Normal poor stealth that other planes have, right, is a value of 1. Medium stealth on seaplanes is 1.5. Good stealth on the Raven is 2. The MiG-29M has 1.25. So it has a bit of stealth. Not nothing huge, but it has at least a bit of stealth. It does also have exceptional air detection. And of course comes with 4 R77s. So the MiG-29M, I said this in the last one as well, it's like your typical really good support plane in a sense. It supports your other planes most of the time. Or alternatively is okay at finishing off 1 or 2 HP tanks. It carries 4 cluster bombs which aren't amazing, but they are cluster bombs, meaning that if the enemy tank gets out in 1 or 2 HP or something like that, and you just want to finish it off, or you're a bit desperate and want to see if you can snipe a CV, you have the option. The other thing is, of course, with the 4 R77s, you can actually shoot at planes and with respectable accuracy. Of course, at hardened, you're not gonna go up too well against stuff like upfitted KWSs, but it's fine. So this is perfect to go in second line behind your main ASFs. You don't have to actually duel with the enemy ASFs, which you would lose, but still shoot pew pew from the back lines while your other stuff actually brawl with the enemy tanks, dogfight with them, And if you don't have any use for that, you still have the cluster planes, to do something with. So I think this is a bit underrated, and the issue is just once more, just so much other stuff you want to put in your air tab. MiG-31 isn't very good. It also has the super air detection, like the Tomcat and the 31M, which is twice as far as other exceptional air detection. So you can actually spot the Nighthawk and the Raven from pretty far away. But here's a big difference. Also, this is actually 7 HE, right? This one is 8, and this I think this is the only 7 HE missile on all the planes. I don't think this actually. Let me actually check something real quick. I always thought this one also had 8 HE, but I never used it simply because it is semi-active. But yeah, 780. Okay. Same HE as OSAS. And OSAS don't stun, which means that this missile will actually not stun if it hits, which makes the MiG-31 even worse than I thought it was. Yeah, so here's the deal. It can one-shot planes if it crits, assuming they don't have 2 armor or 15 HP like the B5. But a normal hit will not stun the enemy plane. And that's one part of what makes a MiG-31M, but most notably the Tomcat, actually useful. Of course, the range, and the air detection are nice and all, but it's really the fact that they have ADHE and they instantly stun the plane. Any plane, if they hit it. The base MiG-31 will not. So this might as well be a 5 HE missile hit. In many scenarios. Not all of them, but in many. Of course, you can crit, and if you crit one shot, but yeah. And being semi-active, you only get 1 missile out. It either hits or it doesn't, and then you get your second out. But given how, for one, you have to... Do you actually, since this is semi-active, do you also have to aim for 2 seconds? You do, yeah. You have to aim for 2 seconds, which means you essentially have to fly towards a plane for 2 seconds before you can turn around again. Get your missile out, and then you have to wait for the whole flight time for it to hit or miss until you can try again. Whereas the MiG-31M, as well as the Tomcat, fired these missiles in salvos of 2. So the reload time of 1 second is completely irrelevant here, because you have to wait for like 4 or 5 seconds before you can even hit. And by then the enemy plane probably evac'd anyway. Or you're dead. So yeah, MiG-31 base. Essentially you're paying 140 points for a garbage missile and the POG air detection. I mean, yes, to come on elite, right? So your 30% now is 47%. Compared to the MiG-31M, that 40% on hardened is now 48. So yeah, not worth it. MiG-31M, similar thing as the Tomcat, but once more, not having these aim 9s that the Tomcat has, as well as the Vulcan. While you might think it's not a big deal, actually it kind of is, because due to you having to fly towards the enemy plane for 2 seconds before you can turn around into safety again, means that if your enemy is ballsy and actually flies towards you, turning around might not be an option for you anymore. And that's where the Tomcat having aim 9s really comes into play. And of course the additional option to like just hunt down helicopters. That said, missiles have a very, very similar stat, if not the same actually. So while it is worse than a Tomcat, I'm inclined to still give it B tier. For team games, I would not recommend this in 1 versus 1s. Actually, no. I retract my previous statement. C tier. It's certainly better in team games, because there you can certainly afford these planes a lot more, because you might send out like 6, 7, 8 missiles before this actually hits a thing. Because what can also very often happen is, by the time you actually fire your missile, the opponent's plane is already evacing, and you might not even actually hit before the enemy is out. The enemy plane is out. So, yeah. SU-24. It's a solid seaplane. It has acceptable range, not full range, but also not minimum range, right? The lowest seat missile range is 4,200. There's good AP actually, which not very often matters, but sometimes it might. 20% ECM isn't great. It does have stealth though, which, with the exception of the Voodoo, is not that common. If you look at the Jaguar, for example. And it's of course very fast as well. But because it's so cheap, fast, and comes with stealth and has acceptable range, I'm gonna give it B tier. It's just that, it can be very inconsistent. I would still run it down with it, unless you're playing like a tactical or low income game. I would definitely run it down with it, despite its inconsistency. Because it is also relatively easy to kill. 24M used to be like the go-to bomber in like for Soviets or mixed red decks. Hold on a second. I just noticed that when I started recording, or recording this, there was nobody taking a look at this Google Doc, but now I can see that 5 people have this doc open, which might be coincidence, but might not be. For what it's worth, is Saturday evening. 24M, excuse me. Payload isn't too bad, like 30 bombs is a lot. There are only 11 HGs, so they don't hit quite as well, but especially infantry in forests or something, not necessarily towns, but forests, probably gonna be dead. Not that effective against proper tanks, but they're still gonna do some damage. But for 130 points, it's just not very survivable at all, right? And you can use as many seaplanes or whatnot as you want. There's also gonna be like a non-radar AA, and being a bomber that flies relatively low and has to dive in relatively deep, you're gonna get shot by man-pads, etc. So yeah, payload, nice. Survivability, not nice. SU-25. It does have 2 front armor, but not 2 rear armor. And rear armor, I would say, even matters more than the front armor, because not rarely will you like shoot at the enemy tank with the ATGM missile, turn around, and you know, it really takes your plane to turn around until the enemy, you know, missile actually, AA missile actually, you know, gets to hit you. So this may just be, you know, confirmation bias or whatnot, but it feels like you actually get hit into the rear more often than at the front by, you know, when using these planes. That said, while you only have 4 of these missiles, they have more AP than the 25T, and you carry these 4 high HE rocket pods, similarly to the Polish MiG-21MF, or actually quite literally the same ones. So you're very good like sniping AA. So if you roughly know the enemy AA net, or ideally you know the enemy AA position, you can snipe the AA with the rocket pods, because you don't need to have line of sight, you know, just have to know in which bush or something it is. And then, you know, bully the opponent with your ATGM missile and your gun. But you are significantly less survivable than the 25T. Because of course, if you evac, you will turn your back towards the enemy plane. And that's the thing about the 25T, right? Especially if you have semi-active missiles, the 25T, especially if it's still at full HP or not full HP, you will just not be able to kill it with your plane. Because you have to go in like very deep until you get into SRAM range and gun range, and most of the time you're not going to be fast enough. So that's why the 2 rear armor just is such a huge survivability boost. Not so much for the SU-25. I think this is the only one with just SU-25. There's the SU-25K as well. 25T. Yeah, it can really bully your opponents. Again, similarly to the A10 as well as the IL-102, it does require support, but not as much as the IL-102. And of course, it has generally speaking, a bigger impact than the IL-102. You can just circle for ages, or not for ages, but for a good time, shrug off enemy AA, snipe enemy AA, and just tank the missiles, you name it. Yeah. And unlike the A10, which has essentially 3 shots of ATGMs, like 3 double shots, you know, fires the ATGMs in the volleys of 2, where you can kind of bait the missiles, you can't really do with the 25T. It carries 16 of these fuckers. So baiting the missiles and getting it empty, not really a possibility. Also really good at hunting down helicopters due to the speed, the gun, and you know, good sidewinders, and like SRAMs. And even if you get into enemy plane range, you know, this is a force to be reckoned with. Don't underestimate this killing your planes. Yeah. 27M. I kind of want to put this in S tier. So this has 50% ECM, 4 full range 30 AP missiles. Full range meaning 3,500 meters, which is essentially the maximum range you get on ATGM missiles. Or ATGMs, which already has missile in the name. Or AT missiles. And you get 4 R-77s, so you're deadly, uncommon veteran, right? You're gonna be deadly to planes, deadly to anything on the ground that's a vehicle. Downside, you're a 1 per card and you cost 200 points, of course. But its thing is still quite a threat. Unlike, let's say, a Hornet or a Gallup MiG-27K, Yak 141, you can't really consistently kill this with any single plane. Of course, you can, you know, 2 KWSs or something will most certainly, in most scenarios, deal with this. But there's no single plane that will, with like higher than, let's say, 55 or 60% chance, win against this. Rafale 27 PU F-15C, yes, they have the upper hand. It's because they come an elite and not veteran, but not by much. And that is despite this not being primarily an ASF. That's a huge deal. Yeah, I think that's all that needs to be said. Amazing missiles, both against ground and planes. Fully, like 50% ECM, fast, good turn radius, good time over target as well. Gun isn't very useful, but it's not really a big deal on these high point planes. But I don't think it's quite S tier. I think, is it? Honestly, I think it still is. It's just so immensely impactful. 27S is not a particularly good ASF because it only comes on hardened. If you have a semi-active plane, a semi-active missile plane, long-range missile plane, ASF, you really need to have it to counter veteran or elite. Because in order to keep up with, let's say, fire and forget missiles, you need the accuracy. You have a slight bit of range advantage, but it's very, very negligible. You know, and the HE advantage, not a big deal, because a critical hit will still not kill them, and a critical hit will stun in either case. I believe, at least. And since you have 5 HE on the S ramps as well, you know, 6 or 5 HE doesn't really matter in this case. And yeah, for 155 points, you already, for the same price, or nearly the same price, you get a block 52. Wow. I think I never really compared them. For 5 points more, the F-16C, block 52. Same ECM, tiny bit faster, but irrelevant. Turn radius is going to be similar. You get Vulcan, which is of course better, but not a huge deal. 4 Find Forget missile, which with a tiny bit less range, but same accuracy, you know, and 5 HE. And 2 instead of 4 SRAMs, but like, and you still come unhardened. And it's just such a massive difference. Because by the time your second one comes out, the enemy's ASF is gonna already shoot its third out, or about to shoot its third out as well, being Find Forget. So, and that's just a huge difference. If you compare this to the Polish MiG-29, carries 4 of these and 2 of these, and the rest is essentially the same, but comes on a veteran for 20 points less. Not only is it more consistent, but it also costs less. Because you have to keep in mind, 4 is essentially, you have too many missiles. In any head-on engagements, you will never get 3 of these out, these semi-active ones. So you never really need more than 2 in most scenarios, because rarely are gonna go continue fighting at long range after a head-on fight and a head-on dogfight. (27 PU). It's fine. It's like the Seagull. You get 2 more of the M rams, but you don't have the Vulcan. You also have a slightly higher turn radius, but in reality, all of those things not really impactful. Yak 141, solid. It's a solid mid-tier ASF. It can be a bit inconsistent because it carries only 4 missiles. Ideally, you want 3 R-77s, but 2 is still fine. You're not great at really helo diving because of how high you fly and how fast you are with this thing. But you come with good veterancy. You have high-end missiles, 40% ECM. Solid. Again, sometimes, especially if you dogfight against enemy planes, the lack of missiles, only 2 of these and 2 of these can sometimes really hurt you. Just having 1 additional more of the long-range ones, like the KWS, can actually make quite a difference. And of course, also if you like shooting down enemy bombers that might turn around and fly away from you while evacing, only having 2 can also be a bit annoying. But they're solid. I think people sometimes, it feels like they expect too much from this sometimes. The Yak-38s are both pretty bad. They're slow, but have very low survivability. I mean, yes, 70 points for 415 HE bombs is pretty good, don't get me wrong, but you're so slow and have virtually no ECM. Yeah. Being bombers and having to dive in relatively deep, chances are they're gonna die before they even drop the bombs. You know, other bombers at least drop the bombs while dying. they will probably get intercepted before that happens. And those are the Soviet planes. So let's get started with the next one, shall we? So what's next? I want to alternate between red and blue, so let's do UK, which means we're gonna do Commonwealth, you know, because we want to take a look at the planes without the availability bonus. That's why I also didn't use NORAD last time, because Canada is also in here. A4K Skyhawk. Wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't so slow. 2 is 26 AP missiles. You have to keep in mind they're relatively low end, but still 226 AP, fine, forget. It would reload relatively fast, but then you compare this thing to the Peace Pheasant, which granted is 2 Picard, not 3 Picard, 2 unhardened, carries 4 of these things, has 900 kmh, and I believe 20% ECM. Let me check. 20% ECM, yes. And this is just sad. For the price, it is so slow, right? So if it was at least the Kahu, right? It has 260% ECM, 30 AP fire and forget missiles, right? The only one of 2 planes that has fire and forget 30 AP, 60% ECM accuracy, excuse me. The other 30 AP missiles have only 50%, and that's massive. You do notice that. Maybe not on the 27M, but on the Syria, on the MiG-27K, on the Hornet, you do notice they only have 50 and not 60. The other with 61 is of course the Galeb. That said, the Kahu is only one weakness, and that's its speed. For the price, it has amazing missiles. It has solid ECM, good turn radius. The speed sometimes can be an advantage because it means that it won't fly as deep into the enemy AA net while it fires off the missiles. So it turns around a tiny bit faster, or like it doesn't dive that deep into enemy AA net. But most of the time it's just. But if the enemy has radar AA, they will spot this plane like 15 seconds before it's actually into range of killing the tanks most of the time. So they very often have plenty of time to react. But that said, it's still good, because they don't always have the option to smoke, or the smoke's not always fast enough, or just because smoke exists doesn't mean that this slowest plane is suddenly useless. It is still okay, honestly. Strikemaster, kind of similar to the Yak-38. You have fewer bombs. They're also smaller napalm bombs, I believe. But no, also this doesn't have an AoE tag, right? Which means it won't be able to shoot at the 25T or the A10, or even I think just at SU-25. As soon as the unit has 2 front armor, it doesn't matter what its side or rear armor is. This also goes for ground vehicles. HE weapons without the AoE tag will not be able to shoot at them, right? What I mean with that is, you know how, let's say, specs like the Gepard, they will shoot at any ground target, right? They will shoot at any tank, no matter how much armor they have. They will not do a lot of damage. They will panic and stun, but they won't do a lot of damage. But the reason why they can shoot and still do some damage and cause crits is because of the AoE tag, the area of effect. Or you have this on this gun, for example. But if it doesn't, then it can only shoot at 0 armor and 1 armor. And against 1 armor, it will do significantly less damage, like only 10% of the damage. But as soon as any vehicle or plane has 2 front armor, it doesn't matter which way it's facing, HE guns without the AoE tag will not be able to shoot at it. The game just says, nope, not possible. You can, of course, in theory, fire precision, and it can do some damage, but yes. So this won't be able to shoot at all against any SU-25s or the A10 or the IL-102, etc. On top of that, it's also pretty garbage. If it was fast, it would honestly not be too bad, because then you could, like, 2 of these or something for 50 points and 750 kmh or something. Quickly, napalm a bridge, at least one will probably survive, right? It's not a lot of napalm, but at least it's something. But because of how slow they are, you see them so early and you have so much time to react to them, and you don't even have good time over target, so you can't even fly around the map. This one carries a lot more bombs. It's also faster, but it's also like nearly twice the cost. I kind of want to give the C tier because I think napalm planes are not that bad. And you do carry an acceptable payload, right? A single one of these will solidly block a road or a bridge. Like, because 2 bombs, honestly, not gonna do a whole lot. There's not enough napalm to, like, if vehicles drive through it, they get stunned and panicked and stuck in there. Two isn't enough, but 6 generally is. But it's I'm gonna give this the C tier, because if you really desperately want a napalm plane for a certain strategy or something, and for some godforsaken reason nobody in your I wouldn't do this for 1 versus 1, but for team games, and nobody in your team is playing Blue 4 Mixed or US or NORAD or Eurocorps or France, or for some other reason can't fit in the Mirage or the Napalm Phantom, and you have access to this plane, then I guess it can work, because it's sufficiently fast at least, and carries a decent payload. But it's so easy to kill still. But if you really, really want to do that, I guess it can kind of get the job done sometimes. Voodoo. 6 base, by the way. This is also only 1 second reload time, by the way, on the missiles, just like the R60s, the Molniers. Once more, a bit underrated. Yes, it has absolute horrible accuracy, but it costs 45 points. There's not a lot of planes that have for such a low price point, but it's also 900 kmh, right? All the other slow as low point planes like the Dolphins, etc., they cost 30 points, right? But they're also slow, like 500 kmh or something. But this one is 900. So if you have the slots and really want like a very cheap scout for helicopters or planes or something, this will do the job. And if you have them like on, let's actually check what's the accuracy on Elite. On Elite, 25% accuracy equals to 40%. Honestly, not too bad. So 2 of those are actually gonna make, you know, I wouldn't say good, but acceptable helicopter hunters. Those missiles are also fine for that. You can't gun run because you have no gun, but you get those missiles out very fast. So honestly underrated, but still C tier, honestly. Just because plane slots are so valuable, and it is a one-trick pony, really. And you either have to, the thing is, you have to trade off. Either is actually going to be somewhat of a threat to planes, in which case you have to upgrade it to at least hardened, but probably elite. But then you only get 3 of those, and you run out of them so quickly if you use them for like sponging damage or something, because they really can't defend themselves well against planes. So either you get many of them, in which case the missiles are very, very bad, or you get some that have at least somewhat useful missiles, in which case you only get 3 of them. So if you could get like 6 up with it, or 5 on elite, or let's say 5 on veteran, honestly I would bump it up to B tier. Starfighter, very similar to the Harrier that we had recently, last time, the US Harrier. However, it has no ECM. And I think the Harrier also had AIM 9Ls. Let's actually check what's the difference. I think this might also be slightly different rocket pods. I guess that's a disadvantage of, having to, or doing this in a deck menu. Alright, so let me turn off the tier list. So 10 points more. Essentially same rocket pods, although the Canadian one is more accurate, but I don't think it's really a big deal. Rate of fire might be, let me actually check. It looks different, but the question is if in practice it is actually different. So okay. It's a bit hard to read off. No, I think I think the actual rate of fire is the same. The range is also different. It's just that the full salvo of these 38 rockets, the Starfighter reloads in 4 seconds, and the Harrier in 1 second. But it's completely irrelevant because you only have a single salvo. So yeah, but the way the game calculates rate of fire, that means the Starfighter gets a low rate of fire on its stats. Range is not a huge, honestly not a huge deal, but I guess it's something. But for like 10 points more, the Harrier is just honestly significantly better. Significantly better. It can still make an okay Helo Hunter, but low ECM means to just play against something will just kill it very easily. But the actual damage output against helicopters, solid. But of course, only 40% accuracy as well, on top of having only 4 AG. Freedom Fighter, I mean, for the price, once more, great payload. It's sufficiently fast. So if you really overload the enemy AA net, and you get 3 of them per card, right, you can really just keep bombing and bombing and bombing. That said, bad survivability. CF-18 Hornet. See, this has the same payload as the Soviet MiG-21, right? 8 6 AP cluster bombs. But for 20 points more, it has 10% more ECM, I believe, a gun, and 2 AIM-9Ms. So it makes an okay Helo Hunter, and if it comes into range, an actual threat to planes, but could've, would've, should've. But that said, it is still 2 per card, right? And on planes, you know, there is no trade-off for like costing more and like being more high-end. Usually there's a trade-off, you get stronger for more points, but you also lower per card on most units, but not on planes, or not always. So paying 20 points for still getting the same amount of planes, but being stronger is usually very much worth it. And out of all the cluster multi-rolls, this is one of the better ones. Compared this also to the F-16 Fighting Falcon, yeah. How does this compare? You get 6. Oh, this is. Oof. I mean, you get 2 more missiles, but like, also I didn't turn the tier list on yet. Like, you get 2 more AIM-9s, but 2 fewer cluster bombs, and you cost 15 points more. Slightly better turn radius, but not a huge deal in my eyes. I mean, the CF-18 Hornet is just a better multi-roll, or just a better plane, simply. Wrong collision. This is a bit scuffed, or more scuffed than the usual tier list videos, but yeah. So where did we have the Fighting Falcon, huh? It's this F-16C1, right? Yeah. I kind of want to put this in B tier. It's just the kind of plane that it's nice to have, but just hard to really fit in or justify. Because unlike the Kahu, unlike an F-111C or something, it doesn't really fill a proper hole, right? It's just the kind of plane it's just nice to have as, like, you know, like the cherry on top, but the cherry on top is just a 6th plane slot that you simply don't have. 188 Hornet, it's a solid mid-tier ASF. 2 long-range missiles, 6 short-range ones, it's a bit much, but okay. But they're 5 and 6 HE, so any combination of 2 missile hits will kill. 30% ECM, 2 on veteran, you're fast. We have a Vulcan, which is, you know, good gun. It's just solid. Just, yeah. Not really much more to say. Electric Voodoo might be the cheapest 50% ECM plane in the game. You have the lowest, the quote-unquote worst seed missiles possible, I believe, which is still like 50% accurate, right? 20 AP and lowest range, but you're fast and you have 50% ECM. Now, don't get me wrong, this plane will be inconsistent as fuck, but like the survivability for the price is just, there's nothing quite like it. And I'm gonna bump this up to A tier. Now in team games, I would first of all, I would always downvalue down vet it, Jesus, just because of how cheap it is. But in team games especially, I would generally always run these in pairs. Like, usually have some other planes in between. Don't run them directly together, but like with a slight gap and some other planes in between or something. Just to have that extra consistency, but that's a really good seaplane. Eurofighter, it's the same story with the PU and the Sea Eagle. Right? Same stats on the missiles. Yes, it has a slightly different gun. Yes, it has 4 and not 6 missiles, but again, those is irrelevant. F-111C, S tier. It's probably the best HE bomber in the game for just simple HE bombing. Nighthawk is a slightly different story. If I had to choose, I might choose the Nighthawk over it, but you know, for 140 points, you get an amazing payload. You're still super card, and you have good survivability, and you're fast. This thing is just, yeah. I mean, you might remember that this used to have 8 HE, 8 bombs, 1 per card, in early Red Dragons, but it also only had 10% ECM. It was a one-way ticket. There's this meme that some people, well, first of all, some people don't see it as a meme, but actually believe it, that this plane got nerfed. It did not get nerfed. It is way stronger now than it ever was. And with now, I mean ever since they changed it 6 years ago or 5 years ago. Yes, but it is much, much stronger than it was when it had 8 bombs, because it was a one-way ticket and you got 1 per card. And it also cost more, I think 160. Now, it's just an incredibly strong plane. I think that's all that needs to be said. You see a town block, bam, anything set it there. For a tank and smoke, oh, you're gonna deal significant damage to it. And with a bit of luck, you might actually kill a full HP super heavy with this. You will need a bit of luck, but you can actually kill full HP super heavies with this. But tanks will take significant damage from this. Unless all of the bombs land in front of them, then not so much. But if the bombs hit to the side and rear of it, very, very significant damage. And of course, panicked and stunned. And we're gonna end this one here, I think. A bit more scuffed than usual, but you know, I think at this point that's why some of you are actually watching this. And yeah, hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. And I'll hopefully see you next time. Later.